connect.
Oh, no problem.
Let me start interview.
Okay.
آیه
Yes.
ملک یه چیزی جلوی تصویرتون هست، اونو نمیشه کارش کرد.
خب. My voice listening?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Is my voice coming through okay?
آقای نخعی؟
Yeah, we have your voice perfect.
آقای نخعی؟
بله.
خب. For question one, what is the evolutionary approach important for understanding human behavior?
Yes, that's a great question. Basically, an evolutionary approach asks the question, why is the mind designed the way it is? That is, what causal process created the human mind, which is housed in the brain, and importantly, what are the functions of the component parts of our evolved psychology? Basically, much of psychology is conducted in the absence of asking the why question, that is, what is the function of our psychological mechanisms? But to me, that would be crazy. It's like if you were a medical researcher studying the liver, and you didn't, and someone said, what is the function of the liver? And the medical researcher said, oh, I don't know, I'm not interested in that question. Well, we would think that would be a rather incomplete understanding of the liver. The liver is functioned to filter out toxins, to break down toxins, and to prevent poisoning of the body. An evolutionary psychologist asks, what is the function of our psychological mechanisms, our mate preferences, our friendship preferences? Why do we form coalitions? Why do we form groups? Why do we invest in our children? Why do we care about our brothers and sisters? And so an evolutionary lens adds deep insight into the questions that we ask and also the answers that are furnished. And importantly, an evolutionary perspective has heuristic value in guiding researchers to important domains of inquiry. So just as one example, when I got into the field of psychology, basically nobody was studying human mating. But from an evolutionary perspective, because we are a sexually reproducing species, everything has to go through mating. That is, we have to attract mates, we have to retain mates, we have to engage in sex with mates, we have to reproduce. And so mating in sexually reproducing species is an absolutely critical and central area of psychology, but it was entirely ignored by the field, until I came along and some of my colleagues, and an evolutionary lens guided us to ask questions about our mating psychology. And so I guess it has evolutionary psychology has a couple important ingredients that are missing entirely from other areas of psychology. One is, what's the function of the component mechanisms of the mind? Two, the perspective guides us to important domains of inquiry that have been entirely ignored. It's a theoretical lens that sheds light on so many important domains. And so I think that to be extreme about it, which I think is accurate, there's no such thing as a non-evolved psychology. That is, our evolved psychology is the only psychology we have, much like our body is an evolved body. There's no such thing as a non-evolved body, except I guess through maybe artificial intelligence or creating a robot or something. So just as we have an evolved body, we have an evolved mind. And evolutionary psychology is the field that is designed to explore the mechanisms of the mind and its functions.
Yes. Okay. آقای نخعی.
من هستم روی تماس.
خب سوال دوم رو شما بپرس. آقای نخعی.
من دارم صدای من دارین؟
بله بله بله.
Some of the theorists of the history of psychology have had personal motivations to follow a topic or to offer a theory, including Alfred Adler, which when he offered his theory on the inferiority complex, he obviously that had something to do with his past. Is there any cause or causes, specific causes in your personal life that grabbed your attention and interest to evolutionary psychology? And all in all, why did you get interested in this? And then, of course, you enriched it so much that it is now we are interested in it as well.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I guess that the only, I would say two things about your question. Okay, one is that I've always been interested in what makes people motivated to do the things that they do. Is why do people get out of bed in the morning and do whatever they do? What are the fundamental motives of humans? And so I've always been interested in these deeper questions. What makes people tick? And so that's what drew me to the field of psychology. And what drew me to evolution was the search for deeper and deeper explanations. Because when I got into the field of psychology, when I was getting my PhD, I studied all the theories, including Alfred Adler, and all of them struck me as having some intuitive truth to them, but lacked a foundation on which a science of psychology could be built. And so it was the personal search for deeper and deeper explanations that led me to evolution. The other thing on a personal note is, for some reason, I've always been fascinated with human mating. I noticed that when from my teenage years onward, all my friends were obsessed with it. Everyone talks about mating. Everyone talks about who's mating with whom. Gossip is heavily about mating. Who's mating with whom? Who's breaking up with whom? Who's getting divorced? Who's having a child? And of course, I was interested in my own mating life. And so I guess to the degree that there was any personal motivation, I was drawn to the field of mating, which happened to be very lucky, because it turns out that's one of the domains of the human mind that we expect evolutionary processes to shape very interesting and complicated mechanisms of mating.
Yes, okay. Why evolutionary psychology is so attractive for students and a professor of psychology?
Why is it so attractive?
Attractive.
Yeah.
Attractive, fascinating.
Yes. Well, I think because at least many recognize that it is an important theoretical perspective and a necessary one. And the other is that students are absolutely fascinated by it. So in many psychology courses, evolutionary psychology is just one piece. But in fact, I think over time, these pieces have gotten larger and larger and larger as new empirical discoveries have been made that have never been made before. And so it's a very generative theoretical perspective. And of course, some of the topics that are studied, like mating, cooperation, violence, aggression, why do people, why are people vicious to each other? These are topics that people care a lot about. And so evolutionary psychology actually guides you to the things that people care about. So I think that those are some of the reasons that people are so attracted to the field.
Yes, thanks.
من روی خط هستم.
سوال سوم شما بپرس.
In an interview, you've mentioned that you're an evolutionary psychologist, not an evolutionary psychologist, not an evolutionary biologist. And it seems that you want to emphasize there's a distinction between evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology. Where is that distinction line between evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology when it comes to studying human behavior?
Yes, that's a great question, and thank you for that. I guess the way I view it is that in one sense, from one perspective, evolutionary psychology could be viewed as a branch of evolutionary biology. So that is, evolutionary biology is the study of all species on Earth and the causal processes that created those species and the behavior and underlying psychology of those species. Evolutionary psychology focuses primarily on the human species, and so that's one distinction. So I'm less interested in insects or naked mole rats or gerbils, although I do read some articles about them. But the other key difference is the emphasis on our psychology. That is, what is going on in our brains, and how do we process information? And so what evolutionary psychology brings to the mix is an emphasis on the psychological level of description. And some biologists, some evolutionary biologists bypass that level. That is, they go from principles of evolution to trying to predict behavior, bypassing the psychological level. Evolutionary psychologists view the psychological level as absolutely critical because that is the locus of our adaptations. Of course, they're housed in the brain, which is a physical entity, a biological entity. And so there's no, you can't divorce psychology from the brain and the body in which it is housed. But so those are the key distinctions, I think. So one is evolutionary psychology is a sub-branch of evolutionary biology that focuses on humans in particular. And the second is that evolutionary psychology focuses on the psychological mechanisms or information processing devices housed in our brain. Sorry for those beeps there.
No problem.
Off my messaging system.
No problem. سوال چهارم.
In the first chapter of your book, Evolutionary Psychology, you wrote that there are some misunderstandings about evolutionary psychology. One of the most important ones being a sense of genetic determinism. And you have answered that there's an interaction between environment and our genes, but it seems like the mechanism for this interaction is not that clear, because if it was possible to use training to have changes in our evolutionary drives, then something called evolution would lose all meaning, and every generation would be completely different from the previous one.
Okay, interesting question. So, and I'll answer it based on my understanding of your question. But if I'm not understanding it, then please follow up and correct me. When I say interaction, what I mean is genes don't do anything. Genes code for proteins. Proteins code for our evolved psychology, and so yes, you're not going to change the fundamental psychological mechanisms of humans. That is, we have the same evolved taste preferences, the same evolved mate preferences, same evolved habitat preferences, etc. But when I say interaction, what I mean is that all of our evolved psychological mechanisms are designed to solve problems in the environment. And an important part of that is the social environment. So just as an example, I'll give an illustration of how this interaction plays out. Sexual jealousy is an emotion, an evolved emotion that I've studied, but we don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm sexually jealous. There has to be some environmental input, social input that activates sexual jealousy. Is my partner cheating on me? Is my partner thinking of leaving me? Or are my other rivals trying to attract my partner or lure them away from me? And so we have evolved psychology that is attentive to these social events, and how we respond to those events is also dependent on the interaction between what's out there in the social world and what's in our brains, in our evolved psychology. So in this example, if I perceive that I'm very high in mate value and my partner is very devoted to me and she would never leave me because she feels very lucky to be with me, then I'm not going to get very jealous. But if I feel, well, my partner is actually higher in mate value than I am, and maybe she might leave me, then that self-assessment might activate my jealousy, and I might get extremely jealous then and do whatever I can to try to hold on to my partner. And so this is an example of where our social world combined with our psychological assessment of our own qualities, in this case mate value, interact to determine what our actual behavior is.
Yes. سوال 22 رو آقای نخعی بپرس.
Okay.
که با توجه به اینکه به جلسی اشاره کردن.
Okay. In your book, Dangerous Passion, you go over sexual jealousy in detail, and you consider it a successful evolutionary mechanism, and you consider it alongside love and sex, you consider it essential. Now,
Yeah.
The question is, do you not consider sexual jealousy to be part of love, or do you think it's outside of it and somehow looking over it, taking care of it, basically? And what parameters increase the intensity of this jealousy? Is it related to how much love there is?
Oh, yes. Good question. Yeah. I think that love and jealousy are two mating emotions that do interact. So, but they're still somewhat separate. So they interact in the following ways. So someone once said, I think it was a poet, that he who is not jealous is not in love. Now, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but the way that I look at it is this. Okay, what love is all about is forming long-term committed mateships. At least that's a romantic love, or love between a man and a woman. You can't have a long-term pair bond, which is what we have and what love evolved to cement, without an adaptation that was designed to protect that bond. And so jealousy is that mechanism. It's designed to preserve the love relationship. It's designed to fend off rivals. It's designed to engage in mate retention behavior, that is, to keep the mate. And it flows from vigilance to violence, from bestowing benefits on the mate to also inflicting costs on the mate when the mate shows signs of defection or infidelity. And so I think love and jealousy do interact in various ways, and you can't have one without the other. I don't think you could have love with zero jealousy. I think that in a love relationship, for example, a man and a wife, especially in the first year or two of their relationship, if a man's wife were to go sit on the lap of another man at a party and start kissing him, that would be a pretty big violation, and most men would get extremely jealous about that. So I think it is a necessary emotion, just like cheater detection is a necessary adaptation when we form friendships or reciprocal alliances.
Yes, thanks. سوال پنجم رو بپرس آقای نخعی.
سوال
پنجم. فقط این نکته که این چیز میشه ارتباطی با نظریه مثلث عشق استرنبرگ برقرار کرد؟
اینو الان بپرسم یا به اضافه کنم به پنج؟
همین الان.
Do you think there could be any relation between what we just discussed and the love triangle of what اسم دانشمندی چی بود؟
رابرت استرنبرگ.
Robert Sternberg triangle of love. Do you think there's any connection between these two topics?
Yes. I mean, Sternberg's triangular theory of love is basically descriptive. So he has these three components, passion, intimacy, and commitment, I think. Is that the three? But what he doesn't have, and I have a lot of respect for Sternberg, but what he doesn't have is what is the function of these different components, of these three components of love. And so my theory of love adds what are the functions of passion, of commitment, of intimacy. And of course, I don't think with romantic love, you can't divorce sexual passion from that. That is an essential part of romantic love.
Yes, thanks. سوال پنجم بپرس.
In your book, Evolutionary Psychology, you again, we go back to the fact that you talked about misunderstandings of evolutionary psychology. Do you think some of the widespread criticism of evolutionary psychology are caused by these misunderstandings? In other words, do you think like the critics of this approach don't have any considerable scientific arguments against it?
Yeah, I think that there are several sources of resistance to evolutionary psychology, one of which is that there's misunderstandings. So it's very unfortunate, and I don't know what the case is in Iran, but in the United States, you can get an undergraduate degree in psychology and a PhD in psychology in every university in the whole country and never take a single course in evolutionary biology. And so what that means is that there's the generation after generation grows up in total ignorance of evolutionary theory and its details. And it's not something, unlike much of psychology, evolutionary theory requires some training and technical understanding. And so most people simply don't understand it and have misunderstandings. So like they think it's genetic determinism, which it's not. It's an interactionist framework. But misunderstandings about evolutionary theory and evolutionary psychology are only one source of resistance to it. Another is that some people don't like the findings. So for example, some people want men and women to be identical, clones in their evolved psychology. And we're not. And evolutionary psychology has discovered really interesting sex differences in the domains of sexuality and mating and aggression and other areas And people don't like that. They don't want there to be any evolved sex differences. They want men and women to be identical. And so part of the resistance is they don't like the findings. And then the other source of resistance, there are actually, I could go through many, but I'll mention one more. But another source of resistance is that people like to believe that humans are infinitely malleable. And we are flexible, but we're not infinitely malleable. That is, like, let's say, evolved taste preferences. You can change your taste preferences to some degree, and people do, but you can't ever put sugar on your tongue and not experience that as sweet. And so our underlying desires, our underlying preferences are things that are less malleable than our actual behavior. So I may feel, to use the jealousy example again, let's say if someone, another man is making advances to my wife, I may want to punch him in the nose, but I don't, because that will land me in jail. And so you can inhibit the activation of the mechanisms in behavior, but you can't change the underlying mechanisms, or it's very difficult to. So that's why I say the underlying desires or underlying psychology is evolved, and it's there for a reason. It's very stable, but you can change whether you activate some aspects of our psychology or suppress other aspects. And part of when it comes to aggression, we've actually done a pretty good job of suppressing some of our aggressive urges. And so levels of violence have worldwide generally gone down. Homicide rates have generally gone down. Even in countries that were formerly extremely violent, like the Vikings in Scandinavia, in Norway, an extremely violent group, but now they're one of the most peaceful groups in the world, the Scandinavian countries. And so we can suppress the expression of our underlying psychology in behavior. And that's another aspect of why it's interactional, why it's not our genes force us to go out and punch people and kill people. No, they don't. We have a very sophisticated psychology that's responsive to social conditions, social norms, and whether engaging in certain behavior is going to cause us a lot of problems, or whether we're better off engaging in alternative courses of action.
Yes, thanks. سوال ششم رو بپرس آقای نخعی.
Okay. In that same book, Evolutionary Psychology, you talk about how Darwin was, I guess, upset when he faced the male pheasant, because in his belief, his beautiful feathers and his large tail didn't have any survival functionality to it, and it is in fact goes against survival. And of course, later on, it became clear that having such a thing has an important, effective role to play in mating and choosing a mate. Now, but with your theory on the process of choosing a mate, you talk about how men are interested, desire younger women. Do you also, as Darwin was, get upset when you see these days in the world men going after older women? How can this desire be explained based on evolutionary psychology?
Yeah, well, I think that you have to distinguish. Well, let's talk about a couple things. It's an interesting question. So first, thank you for pointing out Darwin's. Basically, that insight led to Darwin's theory of sexual selection, which is that characteristics can evolve simply because they're preferred by one sex, or competition between members of the same sex. The winners of that competition gain preferential access to members of the opposite sex. So sexual selection became an extremely important theory, and Darwin stopped having nightmares after he came up with that theory. When it comes to age preferences, you have to make a distinction between sexual attraction and long-term committed mating. Okay, that's critical. So, for example, in sexual attraction, there is no evidence. Let me put it a different way. There's a ton of evidence that men are sexually attracted to younger women. That is, women in the fertile range. Okay, and the fertile range could be, let's say, 16 to 40 is roughly the fertile period. Fertility peaks in humans at around age 25. Reproductive value, which is a somewhat different concept, peaks a bit earlier in the late teens. But men are sexually attracted to fertile women. That is, women who give physical cues and behavioral cues to fertility. Now, when it comes to long-term mating, though, sexual attraction is not the only criterion, because in long-term mating, you have to form a cooperative relationship. You have to invest in your children. There are social ties, and so and there are also in the modern world generational differences. So let's say a 40-year-old man is a different generation than a 20-year-old woman, and so they're not going to be able to understand each other very well. The 40-year-old man might be very sexually attracted to the 20-year-old, but it might not be a great long-term committed relationship. And so that's one key distinction, separating sexual attraction from long-term committed mating. But the second issue is that you can't always get what you want, as Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones noted. You can't always get what you want. And so men might be attracted to the 20-year-old, but they might settle for the 35-year-old because that's who they can attract. The third thing, importantly, is that our attraction is based on observable cues. And women who are 35 and 40 and 45, they look actually very young compared to what they would have looked like in ancestral conditions. So if you go to hunter-gatherer groups and see a 40-year-old woman, she looks pretty old. But 40-year-old women in the modern environment look pretty young because they're not out in the sun all day, so their skin is smoother. They have makeup, they have health practices and personal hygiene, and so it's the cues that we're attracted to. So a 40-year-old woman in the modern environment might look like a 25-year-old woman in the ancestral environment. And that really reveals something about our psychology. It's not geared to age per se, it's geared to the physical cues that are correlated with that age and hence correlated with fertility.
بس سال هفتم رو بپرس.
Falsifiability in philosophy of science is a very important criteria in, I guess, studying and assessing theories. A lot of critics of the whole evolution theory and also evolutionary psychology consider findings of evolutionary psychology lacking in falsifiability. Of course, you talk about this in your book, and you talk about how there's this falsifiability to the general theory of evolution. But is there in mid-level theories like sexual selection or parental investment, or a specific evolutionary hypothesis like preferences when choosing a sexual partner by men and women? Does the criteria of falsifiability also exist in that level as well?
Yes, good question. And the short answer is yes. So actually, evolutionary theory itself is falsifiable in principle. You could falsify evolutionary theory by showing, for example, that there are adaptations that exist for the benefit of other species, or in the mating domain, if there are adaptations that exist not to benefit you, but to benefit your mating rivals. That would falsify the theory of sexual selection. Parental investment in sexual selection says that the sex that invests more should be more choosy about potential mates. The sex that invests less should be more competitive with members of their own sex for access to members of the opposite sex. So if you found a species where, let's say, females were the high investing sex, but in fact were not choosier, that would falsify Trivers' theory of parental investment in sexual selection. As it happens, that middle level theory has been robustly confirmed by thousands and thousands of species, but it is, of course, falsifiable. Most of the falsifiable predictions, though, center at one level down in the theoretical hierarchy, that is, with specific evolutionary hypotheses. So, for example, in one of mine, early in my career, I hypothesized that men should prioritize physical appearance in women more than women do in men, and that women should prioritize resource acquisition and status more than men do in potential mates, and that should be universal. And so those are falsifiable predictions. So all you have to do is find some cultures where that's not the case, where those sex differences don't exist, and that would falsify the hypothesis. As it turns out, that hypothesis was confirmed by data, including, by the way, in Iran. I don't know if you know this, but I had a small sample from Iran, not as large as I would ideally like, but my sample from Iran also confirmed those predictions. Now, having said that, it is also true that there are some evolutionary hypotheses that are not very well formulated, that are imprecise, or tend not to lead to specific predictions. And so those are not very good hypotheses.
Your voice, من صدای شما الان خوبه؟
نه شما میکروفونتون رو خاموش کنین.
من میکروفونمو چجوری خاموش کنم؟
پایین اون گزینه‌های پایین که قطع کردن و اینا هست، یه علامت دوربین هست، یه علامت
بله.
I'm sorry, there was some problem with the connection. So yeah, we had to take care of that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So so the last point I was making is that there are some hypotheses that have been advanced that are not very well formulated. So just as in any field of science, there are good hypotheses that are crisp, that are anchored in fundamental evolutionary logic and lead to specific testable and falsifiable predictions. And others are kind of vague and not very precise and don't lead to testable predictions. And so those are not very good hypotheses. So, but you judge a field by its best fruits, not by its worst fruits. So in any branch of psychology, we'll find people who are good scientists and poor scientists. And what we hope is that the field moves more toward the good science. And the good science, one other response to the falsifiability issue is that there have been evolutionary hypotheses that have been falsified. So, for example, one was what's called the kin altruism hypothesis of homosexuality, that hypothesized that homosexuality evolved because a subgroup of males can do better for their inclusive fitness by investing in their genetic relatives rather than reproducing directly. And so that leads to the prediction that, well, do homosexual males invest more in their genetic relatives? And the answer is no, they don't. They actually tend to invest slightly less. And so there have been several tests of that kin altruism theory of homosexuality and they have been falsified. The empirical data do not support the hypothesis. And there are others that have been falsified. So the accusation that it's unfalsifiable is simply wrong. You can't claim that something's unfalsifiable if some of the hypotheses have indeed been falsified. And back to your question about the middle level theories, they could be falsified, but the ones that have been standing, like sexual selection, parental investment, sexual selection, are so powerful precisely because they've been so strongly supported by the data, rather than finding species that don't conform to them.
Excellent. سال نهم و دهم رو با توجه به پاسخی که دادن و اینکه این انتقادات به صورت‌های مختلف مطرح میشه دیگه، سال نهم و دهم رو با هم بپرس و انتقاداتی که در مورد از منظر فلسفه علم مطرح میشه.
اوکی. شما باز میکروفون تو بزن چون صداش دوباره داره. اوکی. One of your most serious, not that we're on the topic of criticism on it, one of your most serious critics, David Bowler, in his book called Adaptive Minds, has offered criticism against evolutionary psychology and the theory on sexual preferences of men, of having relationships with younger women. And he thinks your theory has simplified this topic. And then there's the concept of the evolution of desire and why women have sexual relationships. You talk about rape, sexual rape, from the standpoint of evolutionary psychology. As you know, there's been a movement in recent years called Me Too that's been about revealing and going against and fighting rapist men in power. The question would be, do you think rape has increased in the recent 2 decades against women? And why is it being taken more seriously and is followed more recently, this topic?
Yeah, okay, well, interesting questions. I think there are at least 3 or 4 questions embedded within that one.
Yes, yes.
So I will try my best to answer them in order. On the Buller book, this was in 2005, so his book is 15 years old, and Buller's a philosopher, not a scientist, and he's a very smart guy, but I don't have respect for what he did in that book. Basically, what he did is at least when it came to my work, he distorted the arguments. And so he invented arguments that I never made, and then basically what we call straw man arguments, and then destroyed the straw man arguments or claimed to. But in fact, and I've responded to him specifically with respect to sexual jealousy and some of the other things having to do with mate preferences. So I've responded in print to him, and I would direct your readers to some of those responses. So they're on my website; that people can download them free. 2005 under publications. So that's him, and I think no one really takes him very seriously these days in the field of evolutionary science. With respect to the topic of rape and the Me Too movement, there's no evidence that rape rates have gone up recently. Actually, there's evidence that they've gone down. Now, of course, rapes occur in specific contexts. So the context where rape is the most common is warfare. And so when you have warfare, like as exists in the Republic of Congo, for example, or, existed in Vietnam, in the American War in Vietnam, rapes go up in warfare contexts. And the reason for that is that that men basically kill off the bodyguards and of the women, and the women are left helpless, and there are very few negative consequences. So, so rape is something I actually don't think. There's disagreement among the evolutionary community about whether rape is an evolved strategy or not, and I actually don't think it is an evolved strategy. I have a new book coming out called When Men Behave Badly, the hidden roots of sexual deception, harassment, and assault, where I examine this issue in great detail. I have 2 chapters devoted to sexual harassment and rape, and I argue that at least some of the evolutionary hypotheses that have been advanced about rape actually turn out to be false. So one, to be concrete about it, one is what's called the mate deprivation hypothesis, which hypothesizes that men who can't attract women through the normal means of honest courtship or seduction resort to rape because they have no other options available to them. And so this suggests that men low in status, loser males, men who lack economic resources will resort to rape. Well, the empirical evidence does not support that. The empirical evidence supports just the opposite, that men in positions of power and men who can get away with it are more likely to engage in sexual coercion than men who are lower in status or lower in mate value. And so that specific hypothesis, the mate deprivation hypothesis of rape, has been effectively falsified, I argue, in my new book. When it comes to the Me Too movement, part of our evolved psychology is that we're very, very sensitive to status and reputation. Okay, we care greatly. People live and die by the reputation that they have. And so if you engage in conduct like rape, where your reputation is going to be destroyed if others find out about it, that's a social input into our evolved psychology of reputation that will decrease the probability that men will engage in that. And I think that that's happened. So you have part of the Me Too movement is this public shaming of sexual predators, like Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood, Jeffrey Epstein, billionaire. So these are actually good examples of men in positions of power who have sexually exploited and raped younger women, again, falsifying the mate deprivation hypothesis. But so people see these and this public shaming and the loss of jobs. People have started losing jobs. And of course, men are very sensitive to their jobs. You lose your job, you lose your resources, you're not going to be able to attract women. And so I think the Me Too movement has sort of created a reputational damage and real world financial consequences for men who engage in this bad behavior. And so that has resulted in a decrease, not an increase in rape rates. It still occurs, but I view the decrease as a good thing. I think that rape is one of those terrible behaviors that men have engaged in it throughout human evolutionary history at some levels, mainly in warfare, but probably in other contexts. But one of the things that I hope my book does, my new book, does is it draws attention to the ways in which we can decrease the rape rates even lower.
Yes. سال 11 رو پرسیدی آقای نخعی نه؟
10 رو پرسیدم، 11 در مورد پسران نپرسیدم.
آها 11 برای شما
پسران داری؟
آره پسران رو بپرس.
In some countries, the stats on raping boys by older men is higher than stats on rape against women. what could be the evolutionary reason for that?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. I don't know what countries you're referring to, and I know that that occurs. So childhood sexual abuse does occur. I don't have an explanation for it. So I'm not. Do you have specific countries in mind where this is occurring?
چیزه اینکه مثلا رئیس پلیس آگاهی ایران گفته که ما توی ایران این بیشتر از تجاوز به زنان هست، تجاوز به پسران.
Well, for one example, the chief of police in Iran has said that in our country, Iran, that's the way it is. Rape on boys is more than it is on rape against women.
Yeah, I was not aware of that. So I'm sorry, I don't have an explanation.
بگو که باید شما بیاین ایران یه مطالعه‌ای در مورد داشته باشید.
Maybe you should come over here and have a study on this.
Yes, I would love to. I would love to come to Iran. It's one of my the close to the top of my list of countries I would love to visit.
سال 12 رو بپرس.
شما باز میکروفون رو دریافت.
بله بله.
In your books and your articles, especially in explaining the nature and nurture status, you talk about how to study human behavior, the role of evolutionary psychology gets defined alongside other fields. The question is, how is this role defined? Is the role of evolutionary psychology just explaining and describing the reasons, the evolutionary reasons for some of the approaches and behaviors, or could it provide ideas to other fields like law, for example, or therapy for some, I guess, abnormal or bad behavior?
The way that I view it is that evolutionary psychology is a scientific revolution, and we're in the midst of that revolution, and it's not a branch of psychology, it is all of psychology. And so I argue that, yes, it affects not only the things that we've studied so far, but yes, it influences abnormal psychology as well as fields like economics and sociology. Any field that deals with human behavior has to have evolutionary psychology as its core. So when it comes to abnormal behavior and therapy, for example, there are evolutionary therapists, small in number but increasing, and it's been very interesting to talk to some of them. So from an evolutionary perspective, a pathology is when an evolved psychological mechanism is not functioning as it was designed to function. So there's a breakdown. Just like when your car breaks down, there's something that is part of the mechanisms of the car are malfunctioning and are not working properly. And so disorders, are psychological disorders, are when our psychological mechanisms have broken down and are not functioning properly. And so that's one sort of angle to the pathology. Another is that some things that are called pathological are not necessarily pathological from an evolutionary perspective. And so one that I've looked at, and sorry to keep using this example, but pathological jealousy. There's a whole branch of psychiatrists who have diagnosed people as pathologically jealous. And it turns out that in many of these cases, it turns out the man's wife is cheating on them. So even though they're diagnosed as being delusional about jealousy, they're responding to real threats. This is not to say that there isn't pathological jealousy. I think there is. Any mechanism can go awry and malfunction. But the broader question that you're asking is, yes, evolutionary psychology is the core of all fields of human behavior, normal and pathological, perceptual, social, everything across the board, including, as I mentioned, economics and the law. Anything that deals with human behavior and economic behavior, how people spend their money, is behavior. And we actually, in evolutionary psychology, has shed light on economics. It's shed light on the law. You know, we form laws to try to get people to do things, to not do things we don't want them to do. We don't want them to rob, rape, murder, steal, you know, beat people up. And so we have laws to prevent people from doing what they would normally do without those laws. And then we also have laws to try to encourage people to do things that we want them to do, such as bear honest witness testimony when they observe a law, or honest testimony in a court of law. So in short, I see evolutionary psychology as a scientific revolution and as the core of all fields that deal with human behavior.
سوال 14 رو بپرس جاسترانت.
Just friend has become a very common phrase used in the youngest generation of boys and girls. They talk about it as a healthy friendship, like a sibling kind of situation, is a brotherly, sisterly relationship. There's no sex involved. And they talk about that. But it seems like, based on what you write in your books and the differences between relationship drives between men and women, such a friendship should not be, it's not possible. It's impossible to be friends without any kind of sexual interest. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct. I think that it is possible. I mean, I have friendships with females that are not sexual at all. So of course it's possible, but it is sometimes difficult. And the difficulty comes from the fact that men, more than women, tend to become sexually attracted to their female friends. And if that attraction is not reciprocated, that could cause conflict in that friendship, and sometimes the breakup of that friendship. So yes, it's possible for men and women to be friends, but sometimes it's difficult because of that sexual attraction.
سال 16 رو بپرس. سال 16 رو بپرس.
Okay. It seems that some of the sexual mechanisms between men and women, for example, the fact that women reach orgasm later, creates problems between men and women. Meaning some men, especially in traditional cultures, don't pay attention to satisfaction of their wives, of their partners, and after they are satisfied, they abandon the sexual relationship. Yeah. How can such differences be considered a successful evolutional mechanism?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, your question, your observations are correct, that female orgasm typically takes much longer to achieve, maybe 20 minutes on average, whereas men's sexual orgasm can occur relatively quickly, within a couple minutes, or some women say within a couple seconds. Female orgasm, so male orgasm is necessary. We know that male orgasm it's an adaptation, and it facilitates transfer of the sperm into the female reproductive tract, which is necessary for reproduction, conception and reproduction. Female orgasm is not strictly necessary for reproduction. So reproduction can occur, and often does occur, with no female orgasm. Now there's been controversy about whether female orgasm has a function. And with the field of evolutionary science being divided on that. Some argue that it does have a function. Others argue that it does not have a function. And I think it's still an open question. So the hypotheses have been one that female orgasm does facilitates conception, increased probability of the sperm moving up the female reproductive tract and fertilizing the egg. Some have hypothesized that women use female orgasm as a mate selection device. But you're absolutely right. It can, the sex difference in sexuality and in likelihood of orgasm can cause problems, sexual problems in the relationship. Generally, the relationship is better if both the man and the woman are sexually satisfied. So I would encourage all men to devote some effort to that. But yeah, evolution has created these different adaptations in men and women, and they're not always perfectly in sync.
Thanks. سوال 20 رو بپرس.
آقای ملک میکروفون شما بازم.
بله بله.
One of the most important concerns of Iranian politicians is the severe decrease in population growth in Iran. A lot of Iranian men and women are either not interested in marriage, or they don't have children, or they have just one child. And all of these three groups are acting against the evolutionary hypotheses that you make about men and women. Why do you think that is? And based on those same evolutionary teachings, how it could happen to encourage Iranian men and women to get married and have children and alleviate this concern about population growth?
Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple questions there. So first, I would say the Iranian issue that you described is not just in Iran. It's also true in Japan. It's true in Italy. It's true in Scandinavian countries. Many countries are experiencing subpopulation growth due to that. But it doesn't go against the evolutionary psychology in the sense that what we have evolved is adaptations for attraction and adaptations to engage in sex with fertile partners. And historically, that has always led to reproduction. Okay, but what we have in the modern environment is several things happening. One is birth control technology that allows people to control their reproduction. So now sex doesn't lead to reproduction, or people can sever the link between sex and reproduction. A second thing is that so there's been this novel cultural invention that's sort of interfered with that link between sex and reproduction. The other thing is that having children has severe economic consequences in the modern environment. Kids are expensive. And so there's been a trend toward, not overproducing, because that can decrease your quality of life because you don't have enough income to do all the things you want to do. And so I think partly people don't want their lifestyle to be disrupted, is another reason. It's also possible that some elements in the modern environment have decreased sexual motivation. So even like certain plastics, the bottled water and the chemicals that are leached from the plastic in the bottles might be affecting our sexual motivation. And then, of course, we have things, I don't know if this is true in Iran, but pornography, for example, internet pornography, has allowed people to satisfy some of their sexual urges without actually interacting with a real human. And so you have all these modern culturally novel inventions that have interfered with what normally would result in successful reproduction. As to how to change the social environment to get people to reproduce more, because it would, of course, ultimately be disastrous for a culture if the population keeps going down and down and down. You know, you can't sustain a culture with a decreasing population over time. But I don't have any magical cures for that yet. But I'm going to think about that question, and next time we chat, I'll see if I can come up with a good answer. Because it's not just, as I said, not just a problem in your country. It's a problem in many, many countries. It's also a problem in the United States, except that the United States has a high level of immigration, and so even though we also have subpopulation reproduction of the inhabitants, the people coming into the country keep increasing the population, and so our country is offset by that immigration issue. So, but it's a fascinating modern problem that hopefully will get solved in the near future. I know in China, I think in China, maybe even Japan, some countries pay people to reproduce. And so there are financial incentives to have children. So that's one way to do it. I don't know if that's been successful or not, though.
آقای نخعی فقط عذرخواهی کن که ما از زمان مقرر رد شدیم. فقط بگو که این به این دلیله که ما نظریات شما خیلی پربار هستن و پرمحتوا و میشه که ساعتها در موردش صحبت کرد. ما الان 2 تا سوال در مورد موضوعات دیگری غیر از انتخاب جنسی خواهیم داشت. یکی در مورد تروریسم و یکی هم در مورد 5 عامل بزرگ شخصیت و تمام میکنیم.
بگم که این 2 تا سوالو داریم که اگه وقت دارن یا
نه دیگه بگو که همین رو ما میپرسیم و تمام. عذرخواهی کنم.
I have to apologize to you because we have gone over our agreed upon time. The fact of the matter is there's just so much richness to your theories and your ideas that we literally are able to talk hours and hours on end about different aspects of it. But we have 2 more questions if it's possible.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm gonna آیا من سوال تروریسم اول بپرسم؟ 18.
بله.
You have also studied terrorism and I'm sorry, and you have a book named The Murderer Next Door, which is about human desire to kill. And as you know, in the recent 2 decades, the world has been faced with a lot of blind terrorist acts or smart ones, specifically designed ones from certain groups or people. What is the beneficial functionality, evolutional beneficial functionality of terrorism, and why some people join terrorist groups?
Yeah, that's a good question. I should say it's not really my central area of expertise, and so I don't have great insight into it. But I would say that that people, part of our, especially male psychology, is to join groups, and we try to join groups that benefit us. And so coalitional psychology is part of our human nature, especially male nature. I mean, if you look throughout human history, it has been males who have almost exclusively formed coalitions, warfare coalitions to attack other groups. Small group warfare has been very common over human evolutionary history. And unfortunately has been advantageous. So that is, you get a group of 100 males, and if they're able to, over evolutionary time, kill another group of 100 males or 50 males and capture their women, which is what they did and do, then they gain access to reproductively relevant resources. So, so small group warfare, it has been a recurrent feature of our evolutionary past. And so we have part of that warfare psychology in all of us, in males anyway, especially. But it's also the case that terrorism does not have to be an adaptation. It can be an exploitation. So, so very powerful, charismatic leaders can hijack the psychology of other people. So just as we have adaptations to manipulate other people to do things that are against their own interest. And so I think some aspects of terrorism are manipulating or hijacking the psychology of people who join. So for example, with suicide terrorism, it's not in your best evolutionary interest to die. You know, it's in your best interest to survive. But you can be manipulated, your psychology can be manipulated to do things that are against your interests. And so I think that's part of it. So it doesn't have to have an adaptive function. But the other thing is that it's possible, and I don't know the stats on this, so I say it's not my area of expertise, that at least some of the men who join the terrorist organizations have difficulty attracting mates. And so this is why a lot of stuff boils down to mating. Now, not the leaders, but the followers often have difficulty attracting mates and feel very frustrated. And this is especially true in cultures which are polygynous, that is, where some men can take, let's say, up to 4 wives. Then that means that there are 3 men who have 0 wives. And it's the men who have 0 wives that are more likely to join a terrorist organization. Now, of course, some of the leaders of the terrorist organization, people high in status, they're going to have 4, they might have 4 wives anyway, but the followers might have difficulty attracting mates. And so hence joining an organization that promises you either potential access to mates in the modern life or in the afterlife, that can be very attractive. In essence, exploiting or hijacking male sexual psychology. So I think it's the ultimate answer is going to be complicated and have many moving pieces to it.
سوال چیز رو بپرس، 5 عامل بزرگ شخصیت رو بپرس، بعد یه دونه سوال دیگه هم این که حالا اینو بپرس بعد اون رو میگم.
We also have a question about the 5 major personality factors. Early 90s, you wrote about an adaptive approach to these 5 factors. But you considered the 3 factors of urgency, agreeableness, and conscientiousness most important than all. Why do you consider them to be more important than others? And also, in the 4 sources of personal difference that you provided with Mr. Grilling, are those supposed to define and determine these 3 factors?
Okay, I'm not sure. There was a little static when you asked the question, so I'm not sure I fully understand it. But to the degree that I do understand your question, it is a very complicated one. And I'm currently in the midst of writing new work on personality and the major dimensions of personality and why they're important. And so I think it would be very difficult for me to try to capture that in a short answer. I will say that individual differences and personality differences are extremely important. They're part of our adaptive landscape. That is, we have to deal with people who are agreeable or people who are hostile, people who are conscientious and hardworking, and people who are irresponsible and impulsive. We have to deal with people who are emotionally stable and also people who are emotionally unstable. And so these are important parts of our social environment that we have to navigate. And it's also possible that personality differences do reflect strategy differences. So, for example, people who are low in conscientiousness and low in agreeableness tend to pursue an exploitative strategy. That is, they tend to use deception, aggression, coercion, etc., to try to exploit resources from others rather than gain them through their own hard work. And so these might reflect what are called frequency dependent strategies in the pool. But the whole topic of the fascinating topic of individual differences in personality is extremely important, but very complicated and not fully worked out yet. But I'm hoping to do so over the next couple of years.
آقای ملک میکروفون شما قطعه. من الان صدای شما رو ندارم. نه ما الان صدای شما رو نداریم. چیزی نیست. من هیچ صدایی نمیشنوم. اگه موافقید من برم به سمت تشکر خداحافظی که برم. اگه من همچنان صدایی ندارم. I'm sorry, there seems to be a little bit problem with my connection.
Yeah, I'm not hearing any sound.
Yeah, there's a problem with my friend's connection, and I can't hear him also. He's trying to. بدون هندزفری میتونید امتحان کنید آقای ملک؟ نه میکروفون شما همچنان قطعه. اگه موافقید که من برم به سمت الان صدای من شما میشنوید آقای ملک؟ اگه موافقید که من تشکر خداحافظی کنم، من هیچ صدایی از شما نمیشنوم. اگه موافقید که من تشکر خداحافظی کنم با سر علامت بدید.
So is there no fix to the problem?
I'm going to just ask our last question, and I'm sorry, there's the problem with the connection.
Okay.
You began the same path in psychology that Darwin began in general studies and biology. What do you see on the horizon for evolutionary psychology?
What do I see on the horizon for evolutionary psychology?
Yes.
I'm tremendously excited about it. I see huge expanses. I mean, Darwin ended his book on the origin of species with the phrase, in the distant future, psychology will be based on a new foundation. And I think we are in the midst of this scientific revolution where we're seeing this, where evolutionary psychology is influencing and influencing the legal system. So law, how laws are written, economics, there are evolutionary economists, evolutionary therapists, evolutionary sociologists, evolutionary anthropologists. So I see evolutionary psychology as really at the center of all of these disciplines that deal with human behavior. And so to me, it's tremendously exciting to be in the midst of it. I feel very fortunate to have been born and live in a time of a scientific revolution. It's such a privilege to do that. I just hope that I live long enough to keep doing it for many, many more years. As I mentioned, I have a new book coming out in 2 months called When Men Behave Badly, which is about sexual coercion and harassment and deception. Conflict between the sexes is really what the book's about. And I have my next book is going to be about tactics of manipulation that deals with some of your questions of terrorism, is how do people manipulate and influence other people. And I think there's a great evolutionary lens to be focused on that. And then I have a few more books in the pipeline on different topics. And so my hope, so I'm extremely optimistic. The number of evolutionary psychologists keeps growing every year, and it is influencing many more countries. So at the current time, by the way, I have only one of my books has been translated into Persian, the evolutionary psychology textbook, but I'm very much hoping that more of my books will be translated, like The Evolution of Desire, for example, so that people in your country can read them in your language rather than in English. So I'm very, very optimistic, and I get emails from people in Iran. I think I had something like half a dozen students from Iran email me asking if they can apply to graduate school to work with me. So I'm very encouraged by this kind of resurgence of interest in evolution in your country.
صدامو داری آقای نخعی؟
آره من الان صدای شما رو دارم.
خب thank you so much Dr. Boss. I'm very happy to have an excellent interview with you, and I hope that by publishing this interview, the Iranian Psychology Society will be able to get better acquainted with your theory and ideas.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been wonderful talking to you, and thank you for asking such penetrating and intelligent questions. It's been really a delight to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thank you so much from me as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for translating well.
Goodbye.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye.
It was my pleasure. Bye.
Goodbye.